2022. The first item of business is item 2A, which is variance ZA 22-01, 690 East Fairway Drive. And Mr. Sanks, is there a staff report?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, board members, and happy New Year to everybody. Yes, we have one item on the Board of Adjustment calendar tonight. It's for a street side yard wall setback variance. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and do as I normally do, and I'll share my screen with the staff report so that the board members and the public can follow along. Just one moment, please. Okay, great. So for 690 East Fairway Drive, the applicant is requesting a variance from the zoning ordinance section, specifically 32.02.8.5. And this is pertaining to corner lots that are abutting a key lot. And basically what that means is you've got a lot on a corner, and the key lot is a lot that sides to the back of that lot, more or less. Sides, or kind of sides to it in this case. So that the wall that encloses the rear yard of that home is allowed to extend only to the midpoint of the main building setback. And I've got some exhibits to help kind of walk everyone through this, since it can be a little confusing to just explain via verbally. So just an understanding of the zoning ordinance. For this lot, when you're on a corner lot, and I know that the board is familiar with this, when you're on a corner lot, you have to maintain the equivalent of 2 front yard setbacks, right? The street side virtually acts as a front yard setback for the main building. However, there's a provision in the zoning ordinance that allows the homeowner to place a wall in that street side setback at the midpoint of the 30-foot required setback, which means they can place a wall 15 feet from the property line rather than the full 30 feet that would be applicable to, like, let's say the home, the main building setback. So there is a provision that was contemplated by council through the adoption of the zoning ordinance to allow somewhat more rear yard, if you will, for those lots that are placed at street corners and have a street side. In this case, there's some unique zoning history that is on a lot of properties within the town, where at one point when the home was built, there was only a 25-foot side yard requirement, whereas now it's 30. So a longstanding administrative policy has been that they've allowed the use of that 25-foot side yard instead of the now what is 30. So in theory, if you were to apply the midpoint to that, instead of having a 15-foot setback for that wall, they could administratively, through that policy, drop that down to 12-foot 6 inches. But technically the code says 15 feet. So what the applicant has said is in their application, they state, a couple primary arguments. And I'm going to get to the aerial in a moment. They've said that they need a larger backyard, primarily for their children so that they can play. They have a swimming pool back there, and there's not enough space for their family. And 2, they state that there's other homes in the area that appear to have already built walls in a similar fashion. And in other words, they've built walls closer to the side yard property line than we currently under this provision. So they believe that there's some precedent in the area to justify the request. So as we'll scroll down so you can see this, I'm going to be able to use the graphic so we can share what we're talking about on the aerial view. So right over here, this is the home. It's on lot 17. You can see the pool at somewhat of a diagonal in the rear yard. And you can see the abutting key lot behind us. So this is the example of where you're on a corner lot. They're required to have 30 feet here over off the fairway, and this is Villanueva. So there's another 30-foot setback that applies to the home. Again, historically, this used to be a 25-foot requirement, and you can see the kind of property line wall. This is like the entry to the garage. It's kind of like a side entry. There's more pictures I'll show you right there. You can see it below. So the wall is here, and you can see there's this little kind of a jog thing right here. They're asking, so that they have more space back here, can they get a variance to drop down and put a wall 4 feet from the property line, which is virtually 4 feet back of sidewalk, because just back of sidewalk is basically the property line. The right of way ends back to sidewalk. So it would be a variance to reduce the required street side setback for their 6-foot wall that encloses their rear yard from 15 feet to 4 feet. So that would be an 11-foot reduction. So as you look down here at this aerial, what would happen effectively is that the wall would come out to approximately 4 feet from the back of the sidewalk right here. Now, the premise behind the restriction on not allowing the wall to go to the property line on the street side is that what happens to the key lot behind it is that you start to box it in. You know, if this wall comes all the way out and goes down to 4 feet, you start to box it in. The other thing that happens is that it does, it has an kind of an unintended consequence on the streetscape of starting to wall off our streetscapes with walls very close to the back of the sidewalk, which is historically not been very desirable within the city because this city has long since prided itself on having kind of lush, open streetscapes, kind of a low density, single level homes type of environment. So the code was written kind of specifically for this purpose. That said, understandably, the family would like a larger rear yard. So, you know, as staff, we're certainly cognizant of the fact that, you know, they have a family, they'd like more space, you know, but we're required to follow statutory requirements of, you know, can they make the 4 findings based on the context of their specific lot and their request against what the code requires. Here's an additional graphic showing what they would propose. So as you can see in this aerial above, or the street view, this wall is hugging the house here and then does like a taper in the back, right? And so all of this would become new side and rear yard for the home. For those that aren't familiar with it, I'm going to quickly go through the 4 conditions or findings that must be met in order for a variance to be granted. And A, that there's special circumstances or conditions applying to the lot of the land that do not apply to other properties in the district. But such special circumstances were not created by the owner or applicant. This also pertains to prior owners. That the authorization of the variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights. And that authorization of the application will not be materially detrimental to persons residing or working in the vicinity. Steps reviewed these. This, you know, in your packets, or if you've had an opportunity to look at the applications since they were sent, you know, the applicant took a shot at addressing these 4 findings. And oftentimes applicants that aren't as familiar with kind of how to address making those 4 findings, either can directly or not directly really address what we need to hear. Staff has looked at the application with the lens of what we normally need to do to address whether or not they've met the findings. The issue that we've got with the property is that corner lots are not uncommon within the city. And so the street side setback requirement, the specific code provision to allow a wall at the half or the midpoint of that setback, which gives them a somewhat larger yard than if they had to maintain like the full 30, was already contemplated. So we're not really seeing a special circumstance applying that's special to this lot. That doesn't apply to all of the corner lots. What I will say is in our findings, I did note there is somewhat of a special circumstance that applies to this lot and that it's tapered. So it's not a perfectly rectilinear lot. It tapers, making the rear yard smaller. So it wedges, as you can see here. Unfortunately for the current homeowner, I imagine it may have been a prior homeowner, I'm not certain. They placed this pool, this diagonal here, which wasn't a very efficient use of space. So you can see how it's just more or less taking over the whole backyard. And then there's this kind of corner area in the back. I'm not certain if it's usable or not, and I'll let the applicant address that. But I really didn't contemplate from a staff perspective on a hardship, you know, the location of the pool, because it was basically a self-imposed hardship by the owner or a prior owner. They chose to place it that way, and that's basically what the property is inheriting. However, the taper on the lot may be something that the board could consider in evaluating this request as a potential kind of a special circumstance. The second concept was, of course, that this special circumstance, again, not applying the pool to that, but rather the taper of the lot, was not created by the owner or the applicant. Rather, it was created through the subdivision of the property, you know, however many years ago. That could be possibly considered a special circumstance that wasn't created by the owner. And the authorization of the variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights. You know, again, it was difficult to kind of get here because until this point, it was understood that the property was already enjoying substantial property rights. Somebody built the pool the way they wanted to build it and enjoyed the rear yard as they did for many, many years. It's only now that someone is making the case that, oh, I don't have substantial property rights and I need a variance. So there could be some understanding given to the owner and their family that they do need a variance to have substantial property rights and enjoyment of their backyard. Lastly, that the authorization of the application will not be materially detrimental to persons residing or working in the vicinity, adjacent property, etc. Staff does have a concern with the Board of Adjustment contemplating a precedent of setting, a specific variance approval of a wall just 4 feet back a sidewalk. Now, I've gone through in kind of somewhat significant detail all of these points to the staff report. So, I mean, at a very strict view, if you will, of the code and the concept of do they make the findings or not, I think that it's a little weak in terms of being able to make the findings. But if the board were to consider that the taper of the lot is a special circumstance and that the rear yard in its current form was not a substantial, they weren't able to substantially enjoy the property. If the board were to consider any relief from the zoning ordinance, our recommendation would be one to deny the variance is filed, because 4 feet is simply not enough room to put proper landscaping and trees in there. It's going to look like we walled off the sidewalk. And I think it would set a terrible precedent for corner lots throughout the city. I'm not certain of the history of other lots that have walls built next to the sidewalk. I'm not certain how those got built or when they were permitted. All I know is that in the 7 years that I've been doing reports for the Board of Adjustment, we have not brought forward a variance request of this nature and approved it. So if it occurred more than 7 years ago, or someone built a wall without a permit, I'm not certain. All I can tell you is that in my own history with the Board of Adjustment, we haven't seen it. So that all said, the board does have the discretion to contemplate, this isn't an all or nothing consideration. It's possible that the board could consider a partial relief. And at a minimum, I would suggest to the board, if you were to contemplate giving the property owner relief, presuming that we're able to make the findings, could see some support for maybe reducing the variance to allow the wall 10 feet back of sidewalk, where trees could be properly planted and maintain a lush streetscape, give them somewhat more rear yard room to enjoy it, and kind of consider that, relief, if you will, commensurate to the hardship of the property's special circumstance, if you will. And with that, that's my long and maybe not super direct explanation for that. We would recommend denial of variance is filed, but should the board find the applicant has made the 4 findings, we would suggest a minimum 10 foot setback. And I'm happy to answer questions. I also have the application packet from the applicant, and the applicant is in attendance to make their own case too.
Do any of the board members have any questions for Mr. Sanks?
Are we seeing the full packet, the application packet, or just certain parts of it?
Excuse me, Vice Chair, let me pull that up for you. I can just toggle over. I have it right here. I'm going to unshare screen my report, and then I will go to share screen of the packet. Just let me make sure I have it pulled up correctly. I've got a lot of windows in here. So let me just make sure that the view ratio is sufficient. I'm trying not to too much of the top applicant info. All right, so this is some of these images are going to be familiar because some of them were pulled from the packet and put into my report. They've added some additional photos. You can really stretch this out. Sorry for making me busy. They took this photo. So the wall, of course, they want to bring the wall out to 4 feet from back of this sidewalk line. I'm not actually certain what would happen to this tree in that circumstance. It would actually be in front of that tree or not. Well, this is the picture that's in the staff report, and then this is the image that you saw before where they've proposed to put some landscaping in the 4 foot strip. And then this is a view I did not include in the staff report, but it gives you kind of a bird's eye view of what this would look like in sort of some sort of partition rear yard scenario. That's certainly what's happening behind the wall.
Jason?
Yes.
How far is the existing wall right now? How many feet?
Let me take a look. That's a good question. I'm looking at it now. It looks as though this wall is approximately 15 feet. If you were to sit 15, maybe more from the side of this house. It does this funny jog here. not certain why, but maybe because of the tree. I don't know. It's at least 15 feet, maybe 18 feet. The applicant might be able to address that. When I contemplated the variance request, to be honest, Board Member O'Connor, was what's allowed versus what is proposed versus what's existing versus what's proposed. But that's a good question.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Sanks? Okay, at this point, I think it would be appropriate to hear from the applicant. If the applicant is here, then they can answer the questions about the current placing of the wall.
Hi,
Hello, please state your name for our record and then go ahead.
okay, my name's Ashley Young.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
And do you have additional information you would like to present to the board?
Hi, yes, thank you for your time this evening. You guys did mention the olive tree in the backyard. It is there and it is huge and we really love it. Our children love to play at the olive tree in the front of our yard, but it's right along Fairway. And we'd really like to be able to enclose our backyard with the olive tree in it so we can hang our swings from there. And we have a safe little area for our kids to play in the backyard. That's the cars passing by aren't a threat, or strangers on the street, things like that. We have some neighbors down the road from us that have a side yard essentially exactly how we want it done, and theirs was done in the last couple of years. I can think of 3 actually off the top of my head. I have it written down too. If you just walk down Villanueva, there's 17 houses that have walls that are right along the sidewalk, some inches away from it. Several of them are 4 feet or less. And then even if we were to put the wall 12.5 feet or 10 feet off the sidewalk, that takes you right into the olive tree. The olive tree would still have to get cut, or the wall would have to go around it, which would still take into the yard that we were hoping to get back there. So I think that addresses some of the things that we talked about. Anything else, Josh? Thank you.
Let me go back to Mr. Sanks. The applicant just mentioned that there are 17 houses along Villanueva that have side yards. Has staff looked at that? Are those in fact corner lots the same as this? And are there that many?
Thank you, Chair and board members. In the other lots, what we have is lots that back to other streets. So they're actually through lots instead of what we would call a sort of a key lot and a rear lot situation. So they become through lots where they have streets on 3 sides. So they have not only a street on the back or the front and the side, but they also have one on the rear. I'm going to see if I can share with you the aerial that I've pulled up. Just give me 1 second if you don't mind. I'm here. Thank you. And yes, so the applicant is correct. There are other homes that have a wall pushed to the sidewalk. I'm not certain of the history on all of them, but the one that comes to mind, of course, is this is their home right here where they want to bring the wall out. This is the home next to them that basically pivots and sides. It's almost becomes the key lot. And then this is the home that's basically across the street where they have a wall pushed out. You can see this here, and it does this curvilinear thing right there. So there are some homes that have some certainly unique wall situations, and she may be mentioning the one that's down here as well. These are backing to one another, so it's not quite a key lot situation. So, but she's correct. There are walls that are close to the sidewalk on Villanueva in somewhat different context, but that is well. See if I can zoom in a little bit more.
So Jason, this is Ron. That one picture you're showing of the house on the corner that looks due south, it looks like the wall is right up against the sidewalk. Is that correct? Or am I misreading that?
Can go for a little tour here. I'm not exactly sure, honestly, how some of this got permitted, let alone this accessory structure that they built, because that wouldn't be allowed by code. through the process, you know, I noted that when I reviewed this. I don't know how that got built as it is, and you can see here the wall built to the sidewalk. It's not decorative. I don't know when this wall got built. It's not been stuccoed or painted, and this whole situation here, I'm not sure when that occurred. But as you know, we would never allow a 0-foot setback for a building or a home. So not certain when that materialized. You know, I didn't kind of police the neighborhood, if you will, rather just more or less, this is their home, the applicant's home here. And then if we wanted to, we could kind of take a tour if you want to down the street. This is, you know, the lot adjoining them. And the idea being that we weren't boxing in the lot. Now the lot is kind of tapered at a corner or at an angle as a key lot. So we would be kind of boxing it in up to nearly the sidewalk. Again, you know, there could be a provision as well, like if there was an intention to provide relief and make an accommodation for this tree or something, so they don't have to chop it down or chop it back or whatever. That could be looked at. But you know, I can certainly take you on a Google Street View tour. This is that wall. This is the closest example, but I wouldn't hold it up as an example of I'm not sure what happened here, honestly. And this one does the same taper too, but as you can see, this is Wigwam Boulevard. So these lots have these are full, what we call through lots, where they have streets on actually 3 sides, as opposed to being a key lot in the back where there's a home that sides or abuts it, if that makes sense. So the code is provisioned somewhat differently to lots in a context where they're bound on 3 sides by the streets rather than a home. I'm probably making everybody a little busy here. I'm not trying to, but trying to get you guys a better view of the street, the current condition along the street. I would just again reiterate that I acknowledge. I mean, the applicant does have a pinched rear yard, but to the extent to which the board may find that to be a special circumstance and a hardship that warrants relief and makes the 4 findings, I believe that the board's discretion is how much relief is appropriate to the special circumstance and the hardship. I'll let it rest at our concern would be to provide more walling off, because then these through lots are different. The code applies somewhat differently to the through lots than it does to a key lot.
Does the applicant know how far their existing wall is?
Hi, it's approximately 15 feet. Give or take.
If you don't mind, as the staff, I just wanted to clarify one item for the board. Do you know why the wall jogs currently in the backyard and actually makes the yard smaller in the back? Because there's like a big jog in it. I never spoke with you directly, so if you could answer that, that'd be great.
The L shape that our wall does?
Yeah.
I don't know why it does that. Do you have a better answer?
No, it's just
It's just how it was when we purchased it. And am I allowed to touch on one more thing?
Yes, go ahead.
Not directly to you answer. We did speak with our neighbor behind us, and they told us just to make sure they were happy with it. We didn't want to do anything to make any neighbors upset. And they said they would probably just extend their lush greenery across the back of the wall. And we have great home pride. We take good care of our things, and we wouldn't want to do anything that would make our house look any less beautiful. Thank you.
Board Member
Great.
O'Connor.
Yeah.
If I may go back to your question, the wall right next to the garage there is about 20 feet or so from the property line, and the step back is about 30 feet from the property line.
Okay, thank you. And so just so I'm understanding this correctly, Jason, would they be allowed to extend that existing wall that's 20 feet back to make it larger via the code?
Through administrative policy, since the original setbacks that were vested were 25 feet, they would be allowed to move their wall without a variance to 12 feet 6 inches from the property line. So yes, they would gain approximately 10 feet here and 15 feet here, based on what the just said. So that wall would come, it would basically slide right here without a variance.
Sorry, I'm not seeing what you're saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can figure out how to explain this better. It's kind of, I wonder if I can draw on this thing. Let me see if I can draw. I'm sorry. Give me one second. So what they could do right now, I'm going to draw on the PDF. I believe I'm screen sharing. I'm not. Oh no, I apologize. I realize I'm screen sharing on the aerial, not the PDF. I will switch to PDF and it will show you. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to draw now. You can see the aerial, and then this is the current configuration. Without a variance, they could basically put a wall like right that way. Maybe a little bit further. Sorry, I'm using a mouse. And what they would like to do is they want to basically put it right here. Does that clarify, Board Member O'Connor?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other questions for either Mr. Sanks or the applicant from members of the board?
I have a question, sir.
Go ahead.
So she's telling us we have 17 people that are already doing something close to what she's doing or what she's requesting. And we don't have any record of any of the 17 to say that they've been approved, or this is, have they all done it without board authority?
To the chair, Board Member Claire, there have been no variance requests to move their wall on a lot configuration like this in the last 7 years. There may have been variance requests prior to that. There could have been people that built the wall without a permit. There could have been people, I'm not certain. I do know that the two lots that we looked at are not the same. They don't have the same zoning application in terms of being with a key lot behind them. They're through lots. And so the same revision doesn't technically apply to them because they're bound by 3 sides by streets. So it's a little different. It's possible and you know, beyond 7 years before today that someone came forward with a variance request for a wall. These 17 lots, I have not itemized out all of the lots that have walls closer to the sidewalk that are key lots on corners to research them. I'm not aware of, like I said, any variances in the last 7 years. There could have been before that. I'm not certain of the context of each of those requests if they were.
So my question is that the immediate effect would be to the one home to the right of the screen that we're looking at, and that'd be the only home that would be immediately affected. Is that correct?
Board Member Claire, that's correct. That's the only lot that would be
Directly.
directly impacted by the
Correct.
wall.
Nice.
Otherwise, it would be more of a broad perspective. And as the applicant noted, they said something about extending their greenery or something. The other broader impact on the neighborhood would be the kind of furthering the issue of walls coming closer to the sidewalk in the community. That's one thing that we're evaluating.
I can speak to, I've been on the board longer than 7 years. So we've never really approved anything coming out towards either front yard setbacks or street when they're corner lots. Because it's kind of a continuation, the lot behind it, that's kind of their front yard. And as you go down the neighborhood, we're trying to, it's a streetscape where the front yards become somebody's side yard on when it's a corner lot. In all the years that I've been on the board, I don't think we've ever approved a front yard or a street side yard to come that close to the street. It's something we've been really protective about because we really enjoy our streetscapes.
Thank you for that, Susan.
And Mr. Sanks, is not part of the reason of leaving that much space on either side of the corner, so that an approaching automobile as it approaches the corner, they're not, you've got an open area where they can see around as to what's going on, as opposed to having a lot of bushes that are going to, might be obstructing, depending on which way a vehicle is going.
Whether the idea of site visibility triangles, usually you need at least a 30-foot by 30-foot dimension from the corner to provide safety, if not further, depending on what the posted speeds are on both adjacent streets. These are locals or collectors, I believe, that Illinois, that may be something between. I think the underlying premise of Litchfield Park's requirement, as it was specifically written for this purpose, that's why there's a provision for the walls to be allowed at the midpoint rather than the full 30, was to give them some relief, to give them some rear yard, which this property is not currently using. As you can see, they're not currently using the full provision within the code that they're allowed. So whoever built the wall before, I understand the prior owners didn't leverage the full extent of what they're allowed to use. But instead of using that now, what the owner would like, they are asking the board for relief to get even further to the closer to the property line than what is allowed. So the idea was the idea that block corners would wrap and that you wouldn't box in the key lot behind you, so that the continuation of your neighbor who's the key lot, which is number 18 up here, their yard space would be semi-contiguous with your lush landscape street side, so that you wouldn't have this juxtaposition or sawtoothing of property line walls, creating kind of odd boxed in. This one would be boxed in and boxing him off all the way to here, for example. It would create odd conditions, and that's why the streetscape is governed the way it is in the code.
May I ask another question?
Yes, go ahead.
Does a 30-foot setback only require to a structure? If they were to come in with landscaping and create a hedge line, would that be against anything that we're doing? Anything that we're requiring?
Board member Claire, there wouldn't be any prohibition against landscape in the side yard. It doesn't require a permit. Now, if there was a site visibility safety issue, I mean, for example, if they were to load up the corner down here and nobody could see to safely intersect with these two streets, we could ask them to trim it back to meet safety standards, but this is something different. What you're asking is, could they use a hedge for privacy and basically encircle the yard with landscape? And the answer would be yes.
Correct. I'm trying to find a way that allows them to get what they want without actual physical structure. Kind of splitting the baby, unfortunately, but yes.
I mean, and like to reiterate, they do have the ability to move their wall right now with a permit without a variance. It's just the extent to what they believe is necessary for their enjoyment of their yard versus what special circumstances.
Thank you, Jason.
Any more questions or comments? Okay, well, I have a couple of comments. Reminding the board those 4 elements that we have to look at each time. It's not if one of them works, then everything is okay. It's just the opposite. We're supposed to make a finding that all 4 of those conditions are met. So one of the issues that always comes up, if someone buys a house that is already laid out a certain way, that, to my way of thinking, is not a hardship because they bought the house the way it was. Now, on the other hand, we are not supposed to be a super city council. We're supposed to, we have some authority to make some leeway with what we're doing. So I think Mr. Sanks had a good point when he said, built within the code is the ability for them to get some extension on the corner lot. So for me, that makes it difficult for me to support the application. I don't have a problem if they want to take Mr. Sanks' suggestion and go, with a shorter one. And I have to say that one lot, that one house we saw with the shed or whatever that is sitting on the edge, I don't know how that got approved either, but I would definitely not like that to turn out to be the new standard, you know, going forward, because once things start getting approved, it's always hard to unring the bell and go backwards. So I have all of those concerns. And I'm also concerned with the idea that there are 17 properties out there that may or may not be similar. I would really be curious as to whether they're different. Maybe they're through lots and they're not key lots. But in any event, those are the concerns that, you know, that I have. Because, for example, the city council, if they wanted to, they could amend the code and change that where it would no longer, you know, be an issue. In any event, I don't think there's been anything in the time that I've been on the board, and it's been a long time. I don't remember anything coming before us involving a key lot like this. Anyway, with that, I'll throw it back out. If anyone else has any more comments or questions, then at some point we need to go out of the hearing and go into the decision-making phase of this.
Hello, this is Patrick Ryan,
Okay,
just a member of the public. Am I allowed to make comment here?
yeah, we're still in the public hearing process. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm a neighbor to the Young family and I live at 140 South Capilla. And we bought the property in 2017 and basically put a wall on our side yard after going to the city and paying for some kind of a fee to have it looked at as far as whether it had to go in front of the design and review committee as you folks. We were told it didn't have to. Now, whether it's because we're a through lot and not a keystone or whatever, then maybe that's why. We then went through your building inspection and permitted the wall and had it built. And that's one of the walls that Ashley was referring to. And we are within, I believe it's about 4 feet to the sidewalk, but we're actually about 10 feet to the property line as where the property was laid out. So again, all done in accordance with, you know, everything we believe to be needed. And I think the wall looks terrific with the landscaping out in front. I think it adds to the overall enhancement of Litchfield Park and keeping in the tone of what everybody wants here, you know, inside the park walls at least. So I went and walked down to the Young family's property. It looks like a good project to be done. I think it would enhance their safety for their children along that busy Villanueva as cars come turning in and off of Wigwam going, you know, north. They're not immediately there on the corner, but they are at a point where I think for the little kids, the use of that backyard would be greatly enhanced at a safer thing versus only landscaping or providing something to that effect. So I would encourage members of this board to go ahead and grant the variance so that that olive tree is kept in the backyard and so that the olive tree is not reduced to bones and that we keep that old growth tree there and working. So that's all I have. And if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Did any board member have a question for Mr. Ryan? Okay, hearing number, is there anyone else in the public that would like to comment? Okay, hearing none, let's move on. And I guess at this point, unless there's any, any further testimony, we should probably close the hearing and then move into item B, which is the board deciding what action to take on this application. So unless someone else has anything else to say, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? I will second that. So all those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we've closed the public hearing. Now we'll move on to item B, which is the discussion and possible action concerning this request. Or do any of the board members have any additional comments?
My only comment would be, Chair, I agree. Unfortunately, I don't see the 4 items being met. And the fact that, I'm hoping that the solution Jason had with the going to 10 feet is something that can be amicable for the applicant, but I don't see how we can go ahead and approve the variance based off of it not meeting the 4 requirements.
Okay. Do any other board members have any comments at this time?
No, I agree with Brian. Also, I think we can't offer the 10 feet. We can offer only the 12.5, right? Legally, they still have to have a variance for the 10 feet. So I'm not seeing that the legal tests are met here either.
Okay. And any other comments? Okay, hearing none, would someone like to make a motion?
Sure, I move that based off of the applicant not meeting the 4 requirements that we deny the application for variance.
Is there a second on the motion to deny?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Claire seconds. We have a motion. We have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
If there are any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, the ayes have it and the motion is denied. I would encourage the applicants to work with staff to see what could be done within the code where you wouldn't need a variance, maybe for a smaller setback. We are bound by the law and what we can do. And like I say, it's ultimately, if the voters wanted to do something different, then they could approach the council about amending the code. In any event, thank you very much for your participation. We wish you well. At this point, we'll move on to item C, which is approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the October 7th, 2021 minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Have a
Second.
motion. There's a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, the minutes are approved. At this point, is there a staff report on current events? Not hearing.
Chairman Ledger and board members, if you prefer, perhaps we can defer the update when we do the Board of Design Review Board meeting after we close this one all at once.
I think that's fine by me.
All right, great.
With that, we'll move on. Board members, we have our agenda, board members' reports for current events. If you have any, we could do that now, or we could do it at the conclusion of the design review meeting. Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn the Board of Adjustment and go into the design review?
So moved.
I'll second.
Got a motion and a second to close the Board of Adjustment and go into design review. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. There are no nays, so we are now adjourned and we will go into the Design Review Board, and I will turn it over to Chairman Charnetsky.
Okay,
And you're putting in the other members right now.
Yeah, Chair Tarnaski, if you
I-
need just a
He's
moment.
toggling them in. Thanks.
you know, a pause for a sec.
Yes,
One second.
and you are good to go, Chair.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and call to order this meeting of the Design Review Board for the City of Litchfield Park. And we'll just go right ahead with the first item of business is design plans for a new casita addition to an existing residence at 14887 West Escondido Drive North. And Jason, you have your staff report for us?
Thank you, Chair Tarnetsky and Design Review Board members. Yes, there are two items tonight. The first item is the design plans for a new casita addition. It's to an existing residence at 14887 West Escondido Drive North. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and I will share the my screen so that we can work through the staff report presentation together. Just one second. Screen parameters here. Okay, wonderful. Okay. Great. So the applicant's requesting a 400 square foot casita in their backyard. They currently have a shade structure that they're going to remove. And in place of that shade structure, they're going to propose a 400 square foot casita, which is more or less a kind of a one bedroom, little baby one bedroom house. We double checked, of course, the 400 square feet slides in under the 500 square foot maximum square footage rule for any accessory structure, even one that's habitable. And based on the floor plan provided, we looked at what we always look at for these habitable guest homes is whether they function as a full second unit, like a second dwelling unit, or if they're indeed accessory and it's subsidiary, if you will, to the main structure. And in this case, they do have a living room, bath, bedroom, and what appears to be a full kitchen. You'll note in the conditions that the code does prohibit a fully functional kitchen or cooking facilities. We oftentimes will see kind of like a wet bar, or someone may have some sort of a kitchenette without a microwave in there or something like that. But we don't allow a stove with a range type of thing to be installed in a guest house. Otherwise, it's basically a second home on the lot. So we would ask that they pull that out of the kitchen, but they could leave behind, for example, a functional wet bar, if you will, for a casita. The colors, materials, architectural features, and the roof tile are noted to be matching the existing residence. You can see the black and white imagery here. I have the full packet. If you don't mind, I can bring that up. Just give me 1 second. If you'd like to see it, I will share that with the board and the public. It just takes me 1 second. Just toggling between PDF viewers and Word programs here. Give me 1 second. I kind of like the shade of the site plan, so just one minute. All right. Here we go. I'm going to stop share on the Word document and I'll go to the PDF. Thank you. Okay, so here is the main house. They have a front entry, a three-car garage, one's a single entry side, a front entry double. And then you go into the back, and then they have a garden area, an existing covered patio, and then the casita is proposed in the rear of the home. You can see, because it's an accessory structure, it's subject to different development standards. Then the main house, it's only, I think it's not a very tall unit, so it meets the setback requirements. And then here's the dimensions, the 20 foot by 20 foot, making it 400 square feet. So based on the plans provided, we are supporting the application on the condition that they remove the range in the oven from the plans. They won't be able to have a separate utility hookup, or really we don't allow a 220 volt hookup in the building permit phase.
Okay. Hey, Jason, is the applicant present?
Looking here to see, they may be present in the Zoom room. If they're muted, if they could unmute, they could present themselves.
But I was just asking if the.
Oh, sorry, I'm
thank you.
here. Yes.
Is there anything you'd like to add to Jason's presentation there?
Yes, could you go back to the floor plan, Jason?
One moment. You can kind of see it here. It's actually.
Well, that's actually, that didn't get changed. If you go back to the floor plans, I just noticed that when you went to this site, it does show the stove. In the floor plan, we did take it out.
Oh, great. Then that said, if you don't mind, board to the chair and to the applicant, if the range has been pulled out, then the condition is kind of a moot point. But based on the plans I had, it appeared to be a range. But just so you know, as an applicant, it's a typical standard condition so that it's never unclear that because of the code restriction that you won't be able to put a range in there in the future either. So it kind of is a reminder to everybody.
Yes, but we can leave the refrigerator, correct? And then that's it, and the sink.
Sure.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the board members for staff or the applicant? Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion?
Sure. I move that we approve the application for the casita based off of the staff recommendations. And again, just reiterating that there would be no cooking facilities in the build out.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
A motion, a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Okay, the motion is carried. Okay, so the project's approved with the stipulation about the range top. Okay, next on the list, item B, design plans for Carl's Jr. Proposed site, architectural, landscaping, and lighting plans for a new drive-through restaurant at the southeast corner of Dysart and Camelback Road. Jason, you want to give your presentation for this too? Can I just also want to make a comment that just getting a couple little sketches, we're not, I don't know if I'm the only one that didn't get a full packet or if it's just not, wasn't attached to the email.
Chair and to the board, I spoke with Daniel earlier. I think it was an oversight in terms of getting the full packet out, and so the staff apologizes for that. I think it won't happen again. I think it was an oversight. The full packet, I believe, was sent via email. Daniel, maybe confirm if it went out today. We met the statutory requirement for the posting, but obviously as the board, you want to see the full packet. Daniel, do you know if that whole thing got emailed today? He may be muted, I'm not certain. In any case,
Sorry, looking through, no, it was only sent to one board member.
okay.
It looks like I did not send it out to the others.
Okay. That said, Chair and board members, I have the applicant's full package for both design review and site plan with all of the attachments. That further, we can take our time to go through this so that it doesn't feel rushed or that you don't have the information you need to evaluate the proposed Carl's Jr. I imagine with the staff report, I'll go slowly and then we can go through all of the exhibits. As you know, I typically have snippets of portions of the exhibits to make the presentation of the staff report, but we have the full packet right here. And I can talk a little bit. I'd like to give you some project history here. We've had a lot of experience with the Dysart and Camelback commercial corner. This is now the 7th development to occur within the center. It's been an interesting road, as you all know, that we don't have truly a master developer and that has kind of come in and managed this whole thing. The city has kind of had to collaborate with the ownership, the attorneys, and then the individual users as they've come on board. We've had Dignity Health that led with the corner, and following Dignity Health, we've done the Cube Smart, the Cobblestone Car Wash, the AutoZone, the Denny's Restaurant, and most recently, we did the Taco Bell. Now Carl's Jr. is coming in with the parcel that's going to be east of the AutoZone, and I'll bring a parcel map. And they're proposing to do 2 users on this pad. One would be the Carl's Jr. and the other one would be a second future phase, which is kind of slotted for perhaps another drive-through restaurant. So there's a lot of drive-throughs going on the parcel, and the site is tight. Now, I want to make it clear to the design review board, and the applicant's very well aware that in order for their current site plan as proposed to the board to work, as shown in the initial conditions of prospective approval, they will need to secure cross parking agreement with another parcel, at least one other parcel in the center, to qualify for the parking counts that they're proposing. We encountered this, you may recall, I'm not certain, with Denny's. Denny's had proposed using the more, if you will, advantageous parking counts where less parking would be required because there's a known shared parking agreement within the center. So the idea that should the Denny's parking lot be full, they could legally park, let's say, in the adjacent users available parking, you know, like a normal commercial shopping center. There are more stringent calculations if they're standalone parcels. So if the parcel is even amongst other commercial parcels, yet doesn't have cross parking allowed, in theory, the other users could deny parking of, let's say, customers to Carl's Jr. on the parcel. They could have no parking signs, they could tow them, they could do whatever they want, it's their property. So what we've advised the applicants, and they're well aware of this, they're pursuing it now, is that they'll go find cross parking. Otherwise, they're going to have a problem with what would be phase 2 of this site, which is the second pad, which is not brought to you for design review approval for architecture, but is reflected on the site plan. So that said, we've been working with the applicant for a couple months now from since their pre-application until their formal submittal, in which we gave them pretty clear direction on what to do with architecture and replicating building colors, materials, design themes, so that they could complement the rest of the center, as we've done with each and every one of the users that have come in, so that we get kind of a baseline of body colors, you know, stone veneers, other types of architectural vernacular to kind of tie them all together. They don't have to be matchy-matchy, but they have to look like they're all kind of talking to one another. We want their parking lot lighting poles to all match. We want their landscaping granite, landscaping palettes, their trees and the street trees to all kind of complement one another. Again, in the absence of a master developer, we've kind of had to do this onesie-twosie as we've gone along to ensure there's some consistency across the center, and it doesn't look like a series of hodgepodge parcel development. So far we've done that, and we've continued to do that with this. And you'll note there are a significant number of conditions of approval. So between myself and Woody reviewing the project, there are a number of items we just want them to kind of tidy up, if you will, before they would go into building and civil construction documents, which would follow prospective site plan and design review approvals if you were to approve the project tonight. So that said, I will go down and go through the landscape plan. We have asked them to add in the Desert Museum to the tree palette so it matches other users in the center, especially directly adjacent on the AutoZone. I did specifically look at AutoZone and Taco Bell's landscape palettes. They will need to match the decomposed granite in terms of size and color. So you don't have, like, let's say a beigey color here and a dark brown color there of granite. It would look very strange. I did note that their lighting fixtures differ somewhat from Taco Bell. They'll need to match those that were submitted for Taco Bell's construction, as well as AutoZone, which is directly adjacent. And last, in terms of the building elevations, I'm going to pull those up here. They've done a lot to address these. The initial building elevations that we kind of looked at were, you know, a lot of these kind of come out of the box, if you will, like the Carl's Jr. corporate or the Taco Bell corporate. You may recall we did a lot of work on Taco Bell to get them to blend with Dignity, to get them to blend with both Denny's and the car wash. And in this case, Carl's Jr. is closest to AutoZone, and I think that they've done a nice job of being complementary to the AutoZone, but not directly, or in Dignity as well, without directly replicating it. You can see there's like the stone at the bottom, there's this beige body color, and then they've done this kind of paneling effect, if you will, but then they brought in some of the Carl's Jr.'s kind of contemporary design elements to the building, which we think are acceptable. They've also added outdoor patio seating as desired. And one item that you'll note is I have asked them for two things that you may can see. They've shadowed in the roof mounted equipment, which I'm not certain if it was a graphical error, but it actually would indicate that the roof mounted equipment is projecting above the height of the parapet, which is not allowed by code. So they'll need to address that to ensure that all roof mounted equipment is 100% fully screened, because we don't want to see AC units or air handlers poking over the top of those. Second, it appears that they've got their kind of wall-mounted architectural lighting over the top of what might be, you know, poster signage for 99-cent hamburgers or whatever those may be. Those wouldn't be allowed. That sort of kind of temporary poster type signage is not supported. And I did check Panda Express and the other users, they also don't have those. Those wouldn't be permitted. All signage requires a permit, and those wouldn't get permits. So those sorts of details where they've got these slots made on the walls would need to be pulled off for construction documents. As you can see, Taco Bell doesn't have them either. So we have a lot of staff conditions of approval. I'd like to actually toggle over to the application packet. Just give me 1 second. And I'm going to pull up the site plan so that we can take a good look at it. 1 second. For your patience as I'm stopping and restarting the screen share with a different program. Okay, so there is a lot going on. It's a busy site plan. I will acknowledge that. Now, this current iteration of their site plan has been reviewed by planning staff as well as Woody, and they've made significant changes since the first version that we'd seen. Pad 1 is the proposed Carl's Jr. Typically, we don't like to see the drive-through windows oriented to the arterial right of way. It's usually one of the lesser desirable angle, or if you will, facade that would face an arterial roadway, because you get the utilitarian aspect of all of the cars queuing, the pickup window, the menu boards over here. Usually what you want is the more attractive side, which would be the customer entrance side, or at least the narrower of what's usually an elongated fast food building oriented to the right of way. Well, this parcel seems to be fitting in a size that is too large for one fast food user and is almost too small for two. They've been really creative with how they've tried to kind of fit it all in here. We've had some concern about circulation to some degree, where people are going to be exiting this future Pad 2 and trying to get out of here, and then there's going to be all these cars queuing. But they do have a double stack lane to handle the additional traffic and queuing. I'm not certain that Carl's Jr. as a user itself is known for having horrible like queue links, such as like a Dutch Brothers or In-N-Out Burger or Krispy Kreme, which has very long queues. So we haven't really identified it as a potential problem yet. Further, if they do have a stacking or queuing problem, they would be stacking or queuing on site and not into an adjacent commercial drive, like the one separating them from the AutoZone or one over here, if that makes sense. We've also reviewed the site plan to ensure proper circulation for trash pickup. So you can see the refuse enclosure here for Pad 2, and then the trash truck could go over here, pick up that trash, and then circulate back out to the arterial roadway, which is Camelback. The applicant did respond to a staff request to put a structural canopy over the drive-through windows, because those are often used as a tool to kind of help soften the appearance of the drive-through, the utilitarian aspect of the drive-through lane on the streetscape. However, when they proposed that and they sent in the site plan, they actually show the canopies projecting into the required 50-foot setback. So you can't have them there. You simply can't have columns in a building structure in the 50-foot setback. So those need to come off. And in our conditions of approval, if the board supports it, we would suggest that they propose something that could meet code requirements, and that would be cantilever, a significant canopy, if you will, that doesn't have columns off of the building, that makes sense in terms of scale, using the same colors and materials they're already proposing. And then get creative with some sort of a screen wall element, perhaps as shown here, each that separates the drive-through lane from the escape lane. And the same would go for the future DR when that comes in. Maybe an enhanced screen wall, maybe it's slightly taller, maybe it's somewhat more beautified if the board has any opinion on that. We'd like to see something happen there so that we're not just staring at the broad face of the drive-through lane, which is, again, generally speaking, less desirable than other building orientations or drive-through orientations. But they're not uncommon. We just they don't have the room to get all of the parking that they need, put two drive-through pads on here, and then still have canopies over the drive-throughs. It's just they're running out of room. So that would be our solution. We don't require structural canopies with columns over drive-through lanes. We've encouraged them when they're oriented to the arterial. In this case, we did encourage them, but they don't fit. So we're suggesting an alternative in terms of design. That said, I have the full packet of materials here. Woody caught several items in terms of ensuring that all of the sidewalks are connecting to the site, because there's inconsistency across some of the plans between site, landscaping, and civil. And one set of plans that'll show the sidewalk connecting, and the other set of plans, the sidewalk isn't shown. And they'll need to ensure consistency across the plan sets as part of their civil documents submittal, which would be the next phase. Lastly, staff is a little concerned. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the landscape plan about some of the, I've got to zoom back out for scale here. Give me 1 second. Actually, zoom back a little bit. So over here, I'm a little concerned that there's a lot of drive-through and a lot of paving occurring on the site, and not as much landscaping as we're used to seeing. For example, with the Taco Bell and other users, there's usually just, they have a bit more room to fit stuff in here. This is a lot of hardscape at the entry. We would ask that they seek out as much foundation, what we call foundation-based landscaping. We don't use that term that often here, but I believe the board understands what I mean. And that is generally around the base of the building or near primary customer entrances. You'll see some element of softscape, so it doesn't feel like all you've got is paving, curbing, sidewalk, and building edge, which is all hard surfaces. But they'll find opportunities at some level to get some softscape in. They're very anxious to get to the board on this current meeting. In a different scenario, we may have asked them for more time to address these issues, but I believe if the board has an opinion on this, they could be addressed through conditions of approval if the board is confident that staff could review for some minor changes with the civil submittal. But with that, we are recommending approval of the application. If you don't mind, I'm going to stop share and go back to the staff report, and then go through the conditions of approval. So again, we are recommending approval subject to the exhibits provided by the applicant, the following several conditions. I know it's not common for you to see this many, but we're got pretty detailed. Proof of the recorded cross parking agreement. They'll need to provide that, otherwise, to be honest, and kind of blows up the site plan. They wouldn't be able to park both of these users without that agreement. The drive-through canopies will be scaled back in terms of the columns and replaced with the cantilevered canopy and additional screen wall enhancements. Additional foundation-based landscaping near the customer entry of pad 1, which is the Carl's Jr. They'll add desert museum trees to the plant palette to be consistent with the AutoZone and other users. They'll confirm that their parking area light pole fixture matches the same detail as the other users in the center. They'll eliminate what appears to be the poster wall signage on the building elevations. They'll ensure all of their roof mounted equipment is completely screened from public view by the building's architecture, aka the haircuts in this example. They shall extend the sidewalks on the east and west sides of the site to the center. As I noted earlier, they're going to ensure that these little doors that open for the trash enclosures, Woody noted, making sure that they're designed so that they're not left open. And you may recall in some centers, it's hard to get around these corners when the staff or the employees leave those opaque gates open. We will do some striping in regards to the driveways. That's going to encourage proper movement and circulation patterns on the site. Woody wants a stop sign for southbound traffic. And then lastly, this is kind of a housekeeping item with the civil submittal. They will need to submit a drainage report to Woody or the city engineer for the project. So with that, I know that's quite the menu of conditions of approval, but we wanted to make sure they were in there so that we could set the expectations for the civil submittal of the site plan and design review applications were approved by the design review board. I'm happy to answer questions and also share any of the applicant's submittal package with the board. I also have the full set of building elevations. If you don't have that, I can pull those up.
That's the one thing I'd like to see is all the building elevations, please. I only had the one that was included on your staff report.
Thank you. I will stop share and then I will reshare on the elevations. Here we go. Perfect. Okay. So I would, one thing to note, based on the staff conditions of approval, you should be able to see the elevations now. The canopy over the drive-through over here would change somewhat and become a cantilever design. And then there would be a screen wall. Instead of these columns, this would be more of an enhanced screen wall. And I imagine some element of this cover would go, and then it would be cantilevered, probably in the same fashion that they're doing the step over the entries with the black.
It's, I guess, where you've pointed out where the poster things and the light fixtures, if we remove those, then it leaves kind of a large blank wall. So what would have to be something proposed to take its place, sort of ornamentation or trellis or something.
Certainly, Karen, to the Chairman Kaneski, certainly we could encourage them to do like 3/4 columnar treatments with an 8-inch offset, if you will, or they could do a trellis feature. The trellis feature might be a solution to enhance these walls because there really isn't that much fenestration occurring on the building. You know, I don't believe I have a floor plan for the facility to know what's dining and what's not dining, where they could put windows. So maybe we could ask the applicant to address that, or if we have suggestions for them to enhance the building elevations, we could do that.
And then where it's gray, you suggested paneling. What was the actual material and you know, sometimes these color renderings don't come out that accurately too.
I apologize again, but let me see if I can get this to kind of, if you can see that, I hope you can. So we got this stone veneer here. You've got the body color ethos and these architectural wall panels. They're noted as color pewter, specification tough block. I know that the team is on board. They've got also the vintage wood appearing panels that is, I believe, a Carl's Jr. spec. I'd probably ask them to elaborate. We have a heavy gray tone palette, but they brought in the beige and the stone to tie it into the center, if you will.
Yes, if someone from the applicants could clarify.
And as I flipped through these, this was my reference. This elevation was a perspective idea for the other pad, but they're not asking for the board's review of this elevation at this time. It is interesting looking, but it's not part of the packet, so don't read too much into it. So you're asking about, Chair, the materials used for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is noted as the tough panels on the materials board. Ian and Joshua, I know you're on the line. I don't know if a member from Kubitschek's office has joined you or if you're prepared to answer those questions.
Thank you, Jason. This is Josh Scripps. I'm Simon CRE. Thank you for presenting so well tonight, Jason. Thank you for the rest of you for listening to us. I would, in this case, defer over to our project architect. Rajesh is working from RKA. I believe he is on the phone here this evening and can speak a little bit more clearly to the material choices here.
Yeah, hello, good evening, respected member of the board, and thank you, Jason, for introducing our project. And this is, we call it, architectural wall panel, which is Anicia, the manufacturer. And, it's like a regular panel, which goes on top of, a back wall or a support system. And I just want to mention one thing, that all these gray, on the color material board, it looks like we have a lot of gray panels. If you open the color material board, please. Yeah, but if you see F, G, H, they are all Sherwin-Williams, same color. But, one is for the awning, one is for the metal cap flashing, and one is for the painted hollow metal door. So it looks like as if we have like 7, 8 grays, but actually it's just one color for different locations. So the gray is only one. So basically right now where you see like 13, squares, out of which 8 is gray, on the building, it is only metal. All metal is going to get gray. So when you open the elevation, so gray is, as you can see, it's actually very limited. It's on the flashing on the top, on the wall, and on the metal canopies. And, very few areas at door and the frames. But other than that, there is no gray. So though on the material board, it looks like 80% is gray, but actually, if you look at the elevations, there's hardly any gray out there. And the Nichia panel is a very standard panel. And yes, Carl's Jr., they use it, but they use it with a different color. But we changed the color to match the adjacent buildings. And we tried our level best to compromise between AutoZone and the Dignity Health there. And, to match the surrounding.
Is that the wall panel, is it, what finish does it have? Is it a more matte or is it a shiny?
It's a little matte there. It's not shiny. It's not
Okay.
like glossy, or it will not reflect that much sun if you are concerned about that, or light. It's a matte finish.
Okay, and then was there, has there been any thought about how the, on the south and north elevations where you've got those, if it turns into a blank wall, a solution to add something there other than where it's not allowed to put poster boards or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, trellis is a good idea, or we can go with some kind of pop-outs or e-face or something. But frankly speaking, we'll have to get back with Carl's Jr. also, because it's a corporate and they might have their own ideas, maybe better than what we can propose. But I do agree that if we remove those panel boards, then probably it's a blank wall, and we will try to do our level best, and we can work with staff to, come up with a solution there so that it doesn't look like blank there. Like
Maybe
we worked with the staff on the other issues.
coordinate with the new, if it's gonna be a cantilevered, for the drive-through, maybe something could coordinate with that, some sort of shared feature.
Sure, yeah, we can provide some sort of, we can match the color or finish or some sort of, similar tone or color, because otherwise it will be really blank.
Yeah.
And we can see what other projects have done adjacent to us, and if we can get something from there, some element, we'll be more than happy to provide.
Okay.
And we'll work with staff on this, not a problem.
And then I had one other question for Jason, and for our other projects, other drive-through projects, so you're mentioning some softer, some landscapes closer to their structures. I guess I haven't paid much attention to what we've approved before. And do you have an example of, is there anything that they could do that has been done with our other restaurant drive-throughs?
Chair, thank you. Good point. So in this case, as you may recall with the site plan, the drive-through lanes and the commercial drives around the site shrink wrap the building pad. Whereas Taco Bell has a deep landscape buffer on the back side of that building, and they have some more landscape on the front of the building. More or less, the Taco Bell site was not as tight. And so what happens is as you close in on the building, you start to run out of softscape area, so you can accommodate sidewalks, building entry, customer entry, service doors, and the actual drive-through lanes themselves. And that's what happened here. You've got customer parking on the south, and then you've got drive-through lanes circling the building on the other three sides with little to no margin for softscape. So in this case, what we would ask them to do is to do studies. I mean, they have some softscape, as you saw in the landscape plan, but to study any opportunity to add additional softscape, we would ask them to do that, or even consider some pots, if you will. I don't, this, they need ADA accessibility, but that they would study that. I looked at Taco Bell and all of the other users. I mean, we've got places where it's tight, but we have a bit more softscape on the other users. They simply have more room.
Do any other board members have questions for Jason or for this applicant? Hang on. Any other concerns or questions regarding the site plan?
I have a question. Getting back to the potential that someday there may be a second user on the site, and there was discussion about queuing, and that area may be a little bit tight. I know that they'll have to come back with that. But I was sitting here, Dutch Bros was mentioned, which has sort of one of our local ones. It's not in Litchfield, but it's pretty much, no matter what they've done, taken over the center that it's in, to the detriment of the other businesses. And I know if you go down to the McDonald's, for example, in the Albertson Center, their drive up is fairly narrow, and their parking is narrow, and I have seen that McDonald's, often having a queue line that appears to be longer than you would expect. And I'm just concerned about, is there going to be enough for this, since this is a tight area, depending on what might go into pad 2 someday, are we sure there's going to be enough parking, and as far as getting the queue line for the drive up through there, I'm just, because it almost, you can see pad 1, as I look at it, appears to have more, the lanes and whatnot, and I look at pad 2, and I'm just concerned that when the time comes, there's going to be a lot of pressure to approve something. And I just want to make sure there's going to be enough parking and enough room there for them to get another drive lane through.
Vice Chair, I just wanted to address that. I've advised the applicant that with their civil submittal and the building submittal, inherent with that plan set would be the floor plan, and the floor plan would need to be congruent with the areas shown on their site plan in terms of the areas they're allocating to the dining space and the kitchen prep areas, which all have different parking ratios assigned to them. The dining area is the most intense at 1 to 50, whereas the others are somewhat less intense parking counts. If at the civil submittal it's not congruent, then what ends up happening, Vice Chair, is that pad 2 will have to shrink in size to the extent that they meet the parking calculations. The one item that would not really be addressed through that exercise would be, our concern at the staff level would be, is on-site circulation going to become congested to the level that it would become a nuisance for residents when they visit the site? And these things oftentimes will work themselves out. If people find that the center is just too busy, they don't want to deal with it, then so be it. The issue that we found that was a little different with this site was, like, if you think of the Dutch Brothers that's in adjacent Goodyear, that created a bunch of havoc because there was so much queuing. Like, other users in the center were complaining that people couldn't get in and out of their pizza shops and other things like this. This one is kind of isolated into its little cell, right? But we would have an on-site issue of congestion if you got another user in there that was very popular. They do have a somewhat longer queuing lane because of the site shape, but it is a single lane. So it could stack up. And this is I think the inflection point where you would see the congestion here. But they would need, like I said, again, the site plan application says what it says. It says pad 1, pad 2, and it assigns the areas for what their uses are, and that their parking basically pencils out exact. If the floor plan submitted with the civil sets differ from that, then ultimately the balance will be reconciled with pad 2, as pad 1 could theoretically be parked. This is a single parcel. And so pad 1 could be parked as shown. The problem would happen is if pad 2 came in and they didn't reconcile their parking issues and their floor plans with their parking counts, it would simply just get smaller. We've seen iterations of this parcel, so Vice Chair, with a smaller pad 2 user, like a Salad and Go or something like that, that's 800 square feet or 900, I think, and it has a direct relief, if you will, on the parking requirements because they're so small. These are relatively sizable drive-through users.
Jason, just to add, it's interesting. So we're here to approve pad 1, correct? Not pad 2, but pad 2's there. So looking at this, the ingress egress does look like it's going to be a potential nightmare if this comes to fruition. And it seems like it would make sense to, if anything, take away some of the parking to add an ingress egress, but I know that's not our charter tonight. But I do find it a little bit challenging to look at this as a workable solution as designed out.
Well, the issue really, when I'm to be honest, I've done quite a few drive-throughs, and I know the applicants have as well, is that when you have the Carl's Jr. Patron come in, and they come in, let's say for whatever reason they come in this direction, they want to pull into the queue lane here, there could be an issue where they start to block the egress of the drive-through lane of the second user. And this is where you don't want to get in a situation where you've actually got the egress of a drive-through blocked because it starts to block the queue from being able to function on the other user. It makes things aggravating for these people, but it doesn't actually stop them from getting out. This is the point that we would be the most concerned about. But you know, what's presented to you is we did need the site plan for the whole parcel because we need to see how it would all work together, right? If they can't make pad 2 function in the future for whatever reason, they would have to make it smaller. What they're proposing right now is a site plan that technically shows that it's parked, that they can make the drive-throughs work, but this point right here might be the concern. Now, please note that this pad 2 will have to come back to the board for design review, board approval, and perhaps even re-site plan approval if that site plan changes, right? But they're not coming forward with the building and such right now. But when we addressed this at pre-app, we didn't want to see like more or less half the site just blank, you know, because we want to know that it can all work together. Otherwise, we'll just have this remnant piece that's neither landscape nor planned for. We wanted to see how it would all work.
Gotcha. And so you're comfortable with the way the layout of the Carl's Jr. is and the ingress egress of the drive-through?
One thing I would suggest is that there could be some striping that would be done with the civil plan submittal to encourage the patrons for Carl's Jr. to approach from the west and come in this way so that they would enter the egress lane here. So these people, I mean, the entrance lane here, and these people get egress and egress back out to Camelback or somewhere else throughout the center without conflicting with what's occurring in this circulation pattern. They have their circulation pattern.
Yeah, and this is Rajesh with RK, and I also like to add that we also realize that potential issue there, and that's the reason if you see that from the main drive aisle, which comes from the right of way, we have staggered the driveway entrance to pad 1 and pad 2. So if someone who wants to go to pad 1, Carl's Jr., comes from the east side, which is AutoZone side, they actually have to come down rather than in the same lane. It's line with the other side drive through. So they cannot just cross over. So probably they'll come down, and if they see that, you know, pad 2 is backed up, they will go around and enter pad 1. So though it's not a physical barrier, but, you know, function wise, they both act as individual driveways for both separate pads. And as Jason mentioned, that the drive-through lane is actually much longer, almost 1.5 times what is required. And that too, we are showing this just as the max outside. Not necessarily we will have this size of the building or this long, you know, drive-through lane there. And maybe the proposed user, because we don't know who the future user is going to be, maybe they might have their drive-through window on the west side next to the pad 1, maybe. So that will add another 3 cars to the drive-through lane, and then they can shorten the drive-through lane entrance to the back or make it wider.
So I'm confused, what part of the site is confirmed that we're doing as far as parking and islands and trash and all that?
Pad 1.
But that's associated with all of the parking to the south?
No, half the parking. And if you see the site data we have provided, assuming we will get a cross parking agreement, the parking required and provided is, you know, we have met the requirement. And that's the reason we have shown whatever maximum potential building we can, because in future, if we reduce the size, you know, I mean, it's not a problem. We can easily adjust, but we didn't want it to show you something small. And as, you know, mentioned, you know, just a vacant land and then come back with almost double the size of the building. Yeah, I'll rather show bigger and then go smaller and show more landscaping and more parking.
Rajesh, could you please, if you don't mind, Chair, can you please explain your phasing of pad 1 versus pad 2, the extent of improvements? I'm not certain if you've had further conversations with Woody, but can you explain the phasing as Carl's Jr. builds out? Exactly where's your phase line, or would you just leave the finished pad for pad 2 and put in all this parking?
I will defer, you know, Simon CRE. to answer this, if Ian or Josh can jump in.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for that question. So at this point, yeah, I mean, I think that it's still in conversation as to what the ideal approach and outcome is to that. But from that preliminary standpoint, we would prefer to do the extent of the site programming needed to make pad 1 operational, and presumably at least set up a pad ready site to the extent that the pad 2 user would be able still to have a versatile approach to what they're doing while remaining within compliance to both code and within the context of this conversation and others with staff.
Here, I don't believe in this. I know Woody's not typically here with us for design review board. I don't see how the site circulation would work without this entrance coming in and this entrance coming in. Clearly, the site, I imagine the phase line would lop off this corner for future development, but the rest of this would probably have to go in. I'm not certain that the second enclosure would need to be there, but I imagine, this is only an exit or egress from the drive-through, so this would be the only commercial drive coming into the site. I don't believe that would be sufficient. They would need a second access point.
And I would agree with you in that regard, Jason. And I think that that's really what we're focusing on at this point in time. And, that said, as we kind of unfold the way that we're going to approach the pad 2 site, that will of course inform to the extent what we're capable of doing during the first phase of things. But yeah, I would say from an ideal preliminary standpoint that we would be performing those improvements to create a full scale of site ingress egress on both sides of the parcel.
Seeing a lot, it's kind of a long list of stipulations. I'm not sure if we're premature in our approval here. I don't know if there's a timeline or if anyone's got any. It seems like the architecture is not quite there and the site plan is not quite there, at least for our understanding of where it's phasing in. I mean, that's my comment. I don't know if any of the other board members share my initial thoughts about that. And there's nothing really bad. It's just not complete.
Well, to the extent that the parking and the ingress egress and the site planning are going at this point, I mean, I think that it's a fair comment to make, given that we're not representing the pad 2 user today. But the assumptions that we're making that have gone into the current level of site programming here, and as Jason had pointed out, I mean, there have been numerous iterations of this plan, and with various different sizes of different pads. And in this particular case, it's more of a conservative assumption based on the size and the way that it's going to work and what that would be, whether that would be the most attractive and applicable scenario for the second end user. And so while it may be that it kind of shapes what you're looking at as incomplete, it's almost a known that it's incomplete, but with the assumption that anything that's kind of backed into that is going to be of a lesser intensity, or at least congruent with what we're representing here today. And as far as that programming and phasing is concerned, we're certainly open to discussion about what is the most effective representation that the city staff and otherwise would want to see here, not just in terms of the design, but in overall functionality as well.
Any comments from the board members? I just hate to, it seems like we're not doing our job if we're approving something that's sort of not ready yet. I mean, I'd like to see the finished elevations. I think before we made Taco Bell come back from their initial submittal. for final approval. And I think they made some substantial revisions. These are minor, but they're still something either we have to leave in the lap of staff and approve it with stipulations.
I would also like to mention here to what Josh said, that on the elevation, actually what comments we see, condition of approval for the building itself, for the Carl's Jr. for design review, there are only two main comments, which are about the poster board, rectangles, which we agreed that we will provide trellis or some kind of treatment there. And the other one was the canopy, which we are working with the city to, and we will show that canopy as cantilever with the screen wall. Other than that, I believe that most of the comments were technical comments, like to have a cross-access parking agreement, cross-parking agreement, and then landscaping base, foundation base, and sidewalk connections and all that. And we do have room around the building because we have about 8 feet, and whatever is required for the ADA, sidewalks, rest of it can be landscaping. We will try to provide foundation-based landscaping wherever possible. If Jason can zoom into the site plan on pad 1, probably you will see that we have about 8 feet on the side, on the east side, where we have 2 drive-through lanes. And we can reduce, if required, a little bit of that island in the middle, and we can provide the foundation base there. So we have some room. And overall, the site, we have, it's not that we have provided less landscaping. The only thing is we have provided landscaping only on one side, unfortunately, that is towards the right-of-way side because of the 50 feet building setback there. So, but we can still adjust the foundation base, and we agree to that. That is like it's shown on the west side of pad 1. And there is the sidewalk which comes from the right of way going all the way to the pad. And that sidewalk in front of pad 1, actually it crosses over drive-through lanes, and then pad 2. And then there is a connection on the east side that goes towards the auto zone. So the sidewalk was shown, but maybe we will add some hatch pattern or some texture there on the drawing so that it's clearly visible. So actually we are providing the screen walls and the sidewalks on the site plan, but unfortunately it's not that visible. So we will make it visible by providing some kind of hatch pattern or something. And then there was a comment about the trash enclosure doors projecting in the driveway. We actually took care of that also. If you move to this, if you move to the, can you please change it to this architectural site plan? And zoom into the, if you see the doors, we have shown the doors which are in line or inside the line of travel for and in line with the curb. So the vehicles will be in the driveway, so our gates are going to be either inside or in line with the line of curb, so that the tires will not hit the door. So we have actually taken most of the consideration of most of the comments, and I believe that there are some comments which are repeated comments, but we can, not repeated, I'm sorry, but comments which are already, taken care of in this site plan. And as Josh mentioned, that we will have both the driveways, and they will just leave the pad 2. And we will need that for the circulation. So, just to sum up, and we are going to come back for pad 2 design review. So I really appreciate if you can approve this here. And if you have any more questions or concerns, we are here to answer your questions. Thank you.
I muted myself. Do any other board members have any comments, concerns? Okay. If no one has any questions or comments, would someone like to propose a motion? Are we all still here?
Chair, may I speak for one moment? I think there's two items here that are kind of outstanding, and that is one, how are we going to address the building elevations? If there's specific direction from the board, like if you have, like, let's say, a couple of concepts that you'd like us to address as a condition and say you want to grant that to staff could always defer to the design review board if they believe that the solution proposed by the applicant is not consistent with the board's motion. Like if they brought something forward and it was like they didn't do anything or they didn't do something that looked right, we could always bring it back to the board before it going to CDs. If you want to see the whole application come back, it could come back next month. Or like I said, if you give us direction and in your recommendation now, we would simply follow that. If we don't believe it's consistent, then we could always defer it back to you anyways.
Is the applicant trying to get this to, and to get construction docs in, or what's, I mean, we always want to get our projects moving. So, but is there a specific deadline that they're trying to meet?
Through the chair, board member O'Connor, I'd defer to either Joshua or Ian to address that. From a staff perspective, there's certainly been motivation to bring this item to the board, and that's where we've been working closely with them. But I would suggest too that, I mean, the design concerns that the chair has shared are certainly valid, so we want to address them and do whatever we can to have a quality project come to Dicer and Camelback. I will suggest that the number of conditions on the staff report are based largely on the number of cleanup items, some of which have been already addressed from the city's engineer, and a couple of them from staff to ensure that it proceeds all tidied up before it gets to CDs. About Ian and Joshua maybe address the issues surrounding your need for your request for board action tonight versus a month from now.
Well, I mean, it is, fairly obvious that there's, always a mad dash to try to get to construction, just among any project. And the reality is that, we have certainly been tasked with a challenging site here, given its constraints in terms of the size and what level of intensity that makes sense within the market and the economics and what works here. And while we've kind of untangled that ball of yarn from a design perspective and overall site programming perspective, and have taken this through pre-application and a number of conversations in and among staff at the city level, there have been a number of things in which we've dedicated resources and time towards. And, we don't own this property yet. We have this in escrow. We're prepared to move forward in this, but there's a number of pressures that are both in front, behind, and above us as we see this unfold. And so it behooves us to try and kind of use those constraints to our advantage in trying to push this through, and not with any manner of negligence, but with the thoughtful process that we've been compliant with up to now, with, as Jason had pointed out, over 7 iterations of this same site program. So it's not as though we're just kind of swiping at it and hoping that it falls into place. This is what we believe to be a very thoughtfully programmed site. The designs are, they do point, your staff, Jason, you've all pointed out a number of details here that are curable, that they are our material, they are fairly technical in essence and intent. And we do think that given the combination of both the resources, time, and thought put into it at this point, that it would qualify the approach of moving forward, given the number of conditions and what they entail. And as Jason had also pointed out here, provided the city and staff are willing to allow us to move forward with conditional approvals, that there is, kind of a catch-all, or a fail-safe, I should say, not a catch-all, but a fail-safe in the event that, we don't quite get what it is that you intend for us to provide you with that is approvable. So I do think that in terms of the timing and overall thought that has gone into this, we're just getting to the point where, we want to continue to be thoughtful within the process, but we have less runway to work with at this point. And that, of course, jeopardizes the viability of the project and site overall.
Thank you. Any other board members' comments? Gonna go ahead and bring up for a motion if you're comfortable with the conditional approval and allowing staff to follow through on stipulations and some of our concerns. A lot of them already enumerated, a couple stated here, and I didn't hear anybody else speak out about any of the design or site or landscaping. If you had any issues or concerns about that.
I mean, I do have issues with the lack of landscape or perception of thereof. And it's always hard to, when you don't see it, right? But it also sounds like it would be addressed in these control mechanisms. But, to your point, Chair, makes it more challenging for us to approve these items when we're approving something that is going to have changes to it.
That's correct. And we've done this before where we've allowed staff, but we've given specific kind of direction. And I guess he's enumerated, Jason has enumerated a lot of that. And I think if we do some of the softscape adjacent to the building on pad 1, and then pad 2 is coming up in the future, maybe it's just something notable for them when they come in a second time. The architecture, I'm not good at design for you. I just want something that'll look right together. That's why I suggested coordinating a cantilever drive-through feature with whatever we do on the wall, something tied together. And I think, I guess staff would just, if they felt they weren't living up to our expectations, and it would have to come back to us.
Here, I believe from the staff perspective in regards to the design review board's expectations for, in particular, the north elevation, but all elevations, but the Camelback facing elevation, I believe staff has a confident perspective on what your expectations would be. And we've got 7 precedents in the center from which to look at that we can draw from. And if we don't feel that they've met if you add the condition for staff to review, that we could defer to the board if it's indeed not met, and it would come back next month. But the anticipation would be that Rajesh, excuse me if I pronounced that incorrectly, but would bring something together at Kuvicek's office as they're, that would meet the board's expectations, because all this is coming out right here and we need to do something else.
Yeah. Do any of the board members feel comfortable making a motion?
Well, excuse me. I guess some of my concerns are there are 15 requirements here that staff wants, resolved, which again lends to the idea that maybe this is not as ready as we normally would hope to see things. But I guess I could make a motion, and I'll go ahead and make a motion and we'll see whether there's support. I move that we provisionally approve this, subject to all of the conditions being met as staff has recommended, and including the chairman's comments about matching the cantilevered canopies in some way with whatever was going to happen on the structure. And I would add to that staff would have the ability to approve within these guidelines, But if there's anything that doesn't meet what what we've talked about, that it would come back at our next meeting. But it is a little, we're looking at this stuff, literally, we got what we got yesterday or the day before. So it's kind of a new thing for us to be looking at it. And there's just a lot of additional questions, I just keep picturing in my mind, the Chick-fil-A and the coffee place with all of their backups, and even the McDonald's down in the Albertsons backs up at times where the entryway gets blocked. Where they're either blocking their own parking lot where you can't get out of there, or they're blocking the side street. And that's just that McDonald's, which is not the largest McDonald's in the world. So I think parking is, something of concern, I think. And part of it is beyond just proof of a recorded cross parking agreement would be necessary. And that, I assume, is with the other users, because we don't know who pad 2 would be. But parking is really, really important. So I would want staff to be really looking at that, as to how that's all going to flow. But having said all that, I can make a motion with the understanding that this is a provisional approval, that staff has full authority to bring it back, if they don't think it's going well. So, I'll make that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
I,
Is there another aye out there? Did I hear 3? There
I
you go.
said I.
Yes, Chair. Vice Chair,
Ron Claire.
the motion.
I said aye.
Okay, we have 3. The motion carries. I'm a no on this one. I just think it's just not ready. But the motion carries, and then we'll let staff bring it back if necessary. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for the time. May I ask one question before we depart, if it's okay? I know this has already taken quite a bit of time, but I just had one quick question regarding the cantilever canopies.
I think we're done except for our end stuff. So yeah.
Certainly. I can actually go offline with Jason on this in that case. I don't need to keep you guys on. But thank you all very much for the time tonight. We generally appreciate it. And we'll look forward to working with you guys into the future.
Okay. Well, I hope everything pulls together just right and we're all happy about it. So I'd like to see it done a little more before we give our stamp to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Okay. The only thing left on our agenda is approval of minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I.
And then do we have staff report on current events?
Thank you, Chair, board members. Just a couple of current events. We have P&Z coming up next week. So we've gone ahead and we've actually initiated the 2022, what's currently labeled the 2022 general plan rewrite. We'd initiated that in 2020, and it kind of got put on the back burner because we had COVID. So we couldn't really engage at that time in a citizen review process that we believe would be effective because we hadn't quite acclimated to our current world of Zoom and hybrid meetings and such. So it's been the direction from the city manager to kick off the general plan rewrite. So we did initiate the 60-day review process as required by statute. It's not 100% clear yet if we'll be taking it forward to council and then ultimately the voters in this election cycle or in 2 years. So our city attorney is reviewing that, but at least we've got it in the 60-day review cycle so that that's a possibility if it's deemed acceptable. So this that's out there, so you know, and the code rewrite, we're basically at 90%, 95% on that in terms of numbers of working review sessions with technical review and then also with our city attorney. Susan Goodwin has still been retained by the law firm. Joe's our current city attorney, but Susan is still working exclusively just on the code rewrite. So 2 very big governing documents, lots of progress. And aside from that, in terms of new perspective, like design review cases, I don't have anything cooking right now, except that you'll probably have something coming forward for Monument Point next month. We're seeing continued interest in the development and build out of the industrial park. We have a pending application, so I would expect that on your agenda next month.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from staff? No. Any board members have anything on current events? Nope. Okay, a motion to adjourn then?
So moved.
Second.
And a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.